Now, ever since the Supergirl backlash and box office disaster, because it is now officially labeled as a box office flop.
Following the catastrophic commercial and critical failure of DC Studios' Supergirl film, multiple members of the original DC movie Legacy cast have launched a coordinated public attack on the production, on Millie Alcock's casting, and on what they characterize as misguided creative direction that prioritizes contemporary social considerations over quality storytelling and character authenticity. Linda Carter, who originated Wonder Woman in the beloved 1970s television series and who has become an elder stateswoman of DC Entertainment, led the charge with a scathing social media post that resonated with other Legacy cast members who had grown increasingly frustrated with how contemporary DC filmmakers were handling these iconic characters. Carter's statement, released just days after Supergirl's disastrous opening weekend, was direct and unsparing. I have watched what is happening to these characters with growing sadness. Wonder Woman did not need to be reimagined as a weapon of contemporary politics. Superman did not need to be diminished and sidelined. And now we have Supergirl, a film that prioritizes checking boxes over creating compelling cinema. This is not the DC legacy I helped build. These are not the values I fought for as an actress representing these characters. Enough is enough. Enough woke shit. It's time to get back to what matters, telling great stories with great characters. Carter's statement apparently struck a nerve within the DC fan community and the entertainment industry. Other Legacy cast members felt emboldened by her public stance and began adding their voices to the criticism. George Clooney, who played Batman in 1997's Batman and Robin, released a statement expressing concerns about DC's direction. "I have tremendous respect for the actors currently working in the DC universe, but I am concerned the studio has lost sight of what makes these characters compelling. These are not vehicles for contemporary political messaging. They are heroic characters with rich backstories and meaningful values. Supergirl forgot that fundamental principle, and audiences responded accordingly." Ben Affleck, who recently played Batman in the Extended Universe films, released a more measured but still critical statement. "I appreciated playing Batman, one of cinema's greatest characters. That experience taught me audiences care about character authenticity and storytelling integrity. When those elements are compromised in service of other considerations, audiences respond accordingly. Supergirl appears to be an example of that dynamic." Kevin Conroy, the legendary voice of Batman in the acclaimed animated series, released a passionate statement. "Batman is defined by moral clarity and commitment to justice. The character transcends contemporary political debates. When we try to make these characters serve contemporary political purposes, we diminish them. We make them less universal and less timeless. Supergirl made that mistake, and audiences rejected it." The coordinated nature of the criticism from multiple Legacy cast members suggested genuine frustration within the DC community about the direction of DC films under James Gunn's leadership. These were not isolated complaints, but represented broader consensus among actors who had defined these characters across different eras of DC filmmaking. Linda Carter became the most vocal Legacy critic, releasing multiple statements and giving interviews about her concerns. In one Entertainment Tonight interview, Carter elaborated, "These characters belong to the world. They belong to audiences of all backgrounds, but they also have specific defining characteristics. When we prioritize contemporary considerations over those characteristics, we disservice the characters and audiences. Wonder Woman was created as a symbol of truth and justice. Those values transcend contemporary politics. When we make her a vehicle for contemporary political messaging, we confuse audiences about what the character represents." The response to the Legacy actors' statements was sharply divided. Some fans and commentators supported their criticisms, arguing they expressed legitimate concerns about contemporary DC filmmaking. These supporters pointed to Supergirl's failure as evidence audiences agreed with concerns about how DC films were being made. Other observers criticized the Legacy actors as reflecting outdated perspectives and resisting necessary evolution in character portrayal. They argued classic characters needed contemporary reinterpretation, and that diverse casting and contemporary social consciousness should be reflected in modern adaptations. The debate became increasingly contentious as both sides dug in. Some observers noted the Legacy actors' criticism seemed less about Alcock's performance as an actress and more about using her casting as a vehicle to criticize what they viewed as problematic creative direction and contemporary political prioritization in DC filmmaking. Millie Alcock, already wounded by Henry Cavill's earlier public criticism, was further devastated by criticism from legacy DC actors. She released a statement, "I have deep respect for legacy actors who played these characters, but I believe these characters can be reinterpreted for contemporary audiences. I approached Supergirl with respect and dedication. I worked hard to bring depth to the character. I am disappointed that my performance and the film have become a lightning rod for broader debates about casting and creative direction." Sources close to Alcock indicated the sustained criticism from critical reviews, Cavill, and now legacy actors, had taken significant emotional toll. The young actress was apparently questioning whether she wanted to continue working in superhero films given the intensity of public scrutiny. The legacy actor's criticism raised broader questions about generational differences in how different eras viewed these iconic characters. Older generation actors like Linda Carter valued traditional interpretations, prioritizing character authenticity and narrative integrity. Younger filmmakers like James Gunn viewed characters as vessels for contemporary storytelling, believing they should reflect contemporary values and diversity. These represented fundamentally different philosophies about adapting classic characters. One prioritized character authenticity and narrative integrity. The other prioritized contemporary social consciousness and diverse representation. Supergirl became the focal point for this broader debate, with the film's failure seemingly validating concerns of those prioritizing character authenticity. The legacy actor's criticism also sent a message to Warner Bros. And James Gunn about the importance of DC legacy and maintaining continuity with what these actors had built across decades. They expressed that contemporary filmmakers had forgotten or dismissed values and approaches that made these characters beloved across generations. According to sources within Warner Bros., executives were concerned by the coordinated criticism from legacy actors. While recognizing some disagreement about creative direction was inevitable, they worried public criticism from respected legacy actors could damage DCU reputation and undermine confidence in Gunn's leadership. James Gunn responded with a measured statement, acknowledging concerns while maintaining his creative vision commitment. "I have deep respect for actors who define these characters across decades. I understand their concerns about character authenticity. However, great stories can be told in multiple ways, and these characters can be reinterpreted for contemporary audiences while maintaining essential characteristics." Supergirl's failure was not about casting or contemporary considerations. It was about execution and storytelling. Those are areas where we need to improve. Gunn's response apparently did not satisfy the legacy actors or their supporters. The debate continued across social media and entertainment media, with legacy actors continuing to express concerns about contemporary DC filmmaking. The situation raised questions about legacy and whether actors who originated characters should have voice in how contemporary filmmakers interpret them. Some argued legacy actors earned the right to express opinions about character portrayal. Others argued contemporary filmmakers had creative prerogative to reinterpret characters regardless of legacy actor preferences. The coordinated criticism also influenced broader conversations about Supergirl's failure and what it suggested about audience preferences for character portrayal. Many noted the legacy actors' criticisms resonated with audiences, and that alignment between their concerns and audience rejection suggested genuine appetite for DC films prioritizing character authenticity and narrative integrity over contemporary political considerations. Linda Carter became increasingly vocal following Supergirl's failure, giving multiple interviews about broader superhero filmmaking concerns. In one interview, Carter noted, "These characters have power because they represent ideals. They represent truth, justice, heroism, courage. When we make them vehicles for contemporary political messaging, we diminish their power. We make them less universal and timeless." Supergirl's audience rejection validates this. People want heroes. They want characters who stand for something meaningful and universal, not characters simply reflecting contemporary political debates. Carter's statements resonated particularly with older audiences who grew up with the 1970s Wonder Woman series and valued her approach to playing the character. These audiences felt contemporary DC filmmaking had lost something important in transitioning to contemporary approaches and desired a return to heroic values that Carter's Wonder Woman embodied. The legacy actor's criticism also put pressure on Warner Brothers to reconsider its approach for future DC projects. Studio executives held conversations about whether the studio needed to reconsider the diversity-focused casting approach informing recent decisions. Some suggested the studio should balance contemporary values with character authenticity and source material faithfulness. However, other executives resisted suggestions the studio back away from diverse casting. They argued diversity in casting was important, and Supergirl's failure should not be attributed to casting choices, but to broader creative direction and execution issues. This tension reflected broader cultural debates playing out through the Supergirl controversy. The legacy actor's criticism extended beyond just casting discussions. They began discussing broader concerns about how contemporary filmmaking was approaching these characters and about whether studios were losing sight of what made these characters meaningful to audiences across generations. Carter particularly focused on how Wonder Woman's core values of truth, compassion, and heroism seemed lost in contemporary interpretations that she viewed as overly focused on political considerations. Other legacy actors also began discussing how their own experiences playing these characters had shaped their understanding of what audiences wanted. They shared stories about fan interactions and about how people responded to their portrayals, emphasizing that audiences connected with these characters because they represented meaningful ideals and because they offered genuine heroism and inspiration. The debate also highlighted generational divides within the entertainment industry itself. Younger writers, directors, and producers often viewed diverse casting and contemporary social consciousness in adaptations as necessary and positive developments. Older generation creators sometimes viewed these changes as potentially compromising character authenticity or classical storytelling approaches. As weeks passed following Supergirl's release, the legacy actor's criticism continued to resonate and influence broader conversations about contemporary superhero filmmaking and what audiences wanted from character adaptations. The situation became emblematic of larger cultural debates about representation, authenticity, and how classic characters should be adapted for contemporary audiences. Whether Warner Brothers would ultimately change its creative approach or continue with current direction remained to be seen, but the legacy actors had clearly succeeded in amplifying concerns about the studio's direction and about whether contemporary approaches to these characters were serving audiences well or undermining what made these characters meaningful across generations. As Linda Carter's campaign against Supergirl and its apparent woke direction gained momentum, additional legacy DC actors began stepping forward to add their voices. Brandon Routh, who had played Superman in the 2006 film Superman Returns, released a statement supporting the legacy actor's concerns about character authenticity. Superman is a character defined by hope and by moral clarity. When we apparently compromise those characteristics in service of contemporary considerations, we undermine what makes Superman meaningful. I trust the audiences and critics who rejected Supergirl were responding to genuine storytelling problems rooted in how these characters were being portrayed. Gal Gadot, who had played Wonder Woman in the recent DC Extended Universe films and who represented a bridge between legacy and contemporary DC filmmaking, also weighed in with a measured but supportive statement. Linda Carter is absolutely right that Wonder Woman represents ideals that transcend contemporary politics. I tried to honor those ideals in my portrayal. The character's power comes from what she stands for, not from contemporary political messaging. These are timeless characters, and they should be treated as such. Gadot's statement was particularly significant because it demonstrated that even actors from the contemporary DC universe shared concerns about the direction that films like Supergirl were taking. This apparent alignment between legacy actors and contemporary franchise actors suggested broader consensus within the acting community about concerns regarding how DC was handling these characters. Jason Momoa, who had played Aquaman and who was cast as Lobo in Supergirl, also apparently shared concerns about the film, though he was more measured in his public statements given his ongoing involvement with DC Studios. According to sources, Momoa privately agreed with concerns being raised by legacy actors, but chose to remain publicly neutral to avoid further complicating his professional relationships with Warner Brothers. The coordinated criticism from legacy DC actors apparently had significant impact on Warner Brothers' thinking about future DC projects. Studio executives reportedly held emergency meetings to discuss the legacy actors' criticisms and what they suggested about studio strategy going forward. Some executives apparently advocated for significant changes to how DC films would be developed and cast, arguing that audience rejection of Supergirl validated legacy actors' concerns about character authenticity. Other executives argued that backing away from diversity-focused casting in response to legacy actor criticism would send the wrong message and would represent capitulation to what they characterized as outdated perspectives. These executives argued the studio should stand by its commitment to diverse casting and should address creative and storytelling issues rather than changing casting approaches. The tension within Warner Brothers between these two positions apparently reflected broader cultural debates playing out across entertainment and society. The studio apparently found itself caught between competing values and competing visions for what DC films should be and who should be represented in these films. The legacy actors' criticism of Supergirl extended beyond just one film. Their statements raised broader questions about how superhero films should be made and what responsibilities studios have to the characters they are adapting and to the legacy of actors who helped define these characters. These questions apparently resonated far beyond just DC circles and apparently influenced how other studios thought about adapting classic characters. Some entertainment analysts argued that the legacy actors' criticisms represented an important counterweight to what they viewed as excessive focus on diversity and contemporary political considerations in character adaptations. These analysts suggested that studios should balance contemporary values with character authenticity, and that the pendulum may have swung too far toward prioritizing contemporary considerations at the expense of what made these characters meaningful across generations. Other analysts argued that legacy actors' perspectives, while respectable, reflected generational biases, and that contemporary filmmakers should have freedom to reinterpret classic characters as they saw fit without being constrained by the preferences of legacy actors or by what those actors characterized as character authenticity. The cost to Millie Alcock's career. The combined criticism from critics, Henry Cavill, James Gunn's apparent crisis, and legacy DC actors apparently took a severe toll on Millie Alcock's career prospects and her emotional well-being. The young actress found herself at the center of a cultural and generational debate about casting, representation, and creative direction, with her performance and casting becoming a lightning rod for broader arguments about the direction of contemporary superhero filmmaking. Sources indicated Alcock was considering stepping back from major studio productions and potentially exploring opportunities in independent filmmaking, or television where she might have more creative control and potentially less intense public scrutiny. The experience of being cast as Supergirl, which should have been a career breakthrough moment for the actress, had instead become a career obstacle given the intense negative reaction the film received. As weeks and months passed following Supergirl's release, the legacy actor's criticisms continued to shape how the entertainment industry and audiences thought about character adaptations. The situation became a case study in how different generations and different creative perspectives could clash over fundamental questions about how classic characters should be portrayed in contemporary cinema. The legacy actors had apparently succeeded in amplifying concerns about DC Studios' direction and in raising questions about whether contemporary approaches to these characters were serving audiences well. Whether Warner Brothers would ultimately change its strategy, however, remained unclear as the studio apparently grappled with balancing legacy concerns with commitments to diverse casting and contemporary representation in its film slate. Lynda Carter's leadership in criticizing contemporary DC filmmaking held particular weight because of her iconic status as the original Wonder Woman. Carter's portrayal of the character in the 1970s television series had become legendary among DC fans and had apparently set a standard for how Wonder Woman should be portrayed, as a heroic character committed to truth, justice, and compassion, grounded in classical mythology but speaking to universal human values. Carter had spent decades after the television series ended continuing to be associated with the character and continuing to represent Wonder Woman in the public imagination. Her decision to publicly criticize contemporary DC filmmaking thus carried significant weight because she was apparently criticizing from a position of genuine expertise and genuine investment in the character's legacy. In interviews following her initial statement, Carter elaborated on what she viewed as lost in contemporary DC filmmaking. Wonder Woman was powerful, not because she had muscles or because she engaged in violence. She was powerful because she believed in truth and justice. She was powerful because she was willing to sacrifice herself for others. She was powerful because she represented ideals that transcended any particular time period. When contemporary filmmakers apparently lose sight of those ideals and apparently make these characters vehicles for contemporary political messaging, they undermine what makes the characters powerful. The legacy actors' criticisms resonated particularly strongly with audiences who had grown up with their portrayals of these characters. Fans who had watched the 1970s Wonder Woman series felt validated in their sense that contemporary DC filmmaking had apparently lost something important. These fans apparently took to social media to express support for the legacy actors and to criticize contemporary DC filmmaking for apparently prioritizing contemporary considerations over storytelling quality and character authenticity. Younger audiences, by contrast, were often more receptive to the diverse casting and contemporary social consciousness that informed recent DC films. These audiences apparently felt that legacy actors' criticisms represented resistance to necessary evolution in how these characters were portrayed and adapted for contemporary audiences. This apparent generational divide in audience response reflected broader societal debates about representation, diversity, and how classic cultural works should be adapted for contemporary contexts. The debate apparently was not simply about filmmaking quality or character authenticity, but was ultimately rooted in different generational perspectives about what contemporary media should represent and whose voices and experiences should be centered in major cultural productions. Beyond legacy DC actors, the entertainment industry more broadly began responding to Supergirl's failure and to the criticisms being raised by legacy actors. Some filmmakers and producers apparently took the situation as a cautionary tale about the risks of making diverse casting choices in historically specific narratives. Other filmmakers apparently viewed the situation as evidence that audiences still valued quality storytelling and character authenticity, regardless of casting choices. Industry critics apparently began using Supergirl as a reference point in discussions about contemporary superhero filmmaking and about how studios should approach adapting classic characters. The film apparently became emblematic of what critics viewed as problems in contemporary superhero filmmaking: prioritization of contemporary considerations over storytelling quality, miscasting of major roles, and loss of what made these characters meaningful to audiences. For James Gunn, the legacy actor's criticism added another layer of challenge to his already difficult position following Supergirl's failure. Not only was he dealing with his own emotional crisis following the film's disaster, but he was also apparently facing sustained public criticism from respected legacy actors who appeared to represent significant portions of the DC fanbase and who had significant cultural authority given their iconic status within DC entertainment. Gunn's response apparently needed to balance multiple considerations, acknowledging legitimate concerns raised by legacy actors, maintaining commitment to his creative vision and to values like diverse casting, and addressing practical storytelling issues that apparently contributed to Supergirl's failure. This apparently proved to be a difficult balancing act that would likely define the trajectory of Gunn's tenure as head of DC Studios going forward. The legacy actors apparently had successfully shifted the conversation about Supergirl's failure from being simply about box office performance and critical reception to being about deeper questions about creative vision, character authenticity, and what contemporary superhero films should be attempting to achieve. Whether this shift in conversation would ultimately lead to changes in how DC Studios approached future projects apparently remained to be seen. The situation with legacy DC actors criticizing contemporary DC filmmaking was not unprecedented in entertainment history. Similar dynamics had apparently played out in other major franchises where legacy actors and contemporary filmmakers had different visions for how characters should be portrayed. In the Star Wars franchise, legacy actors like Mark Hamill had occasionally expressed concerns about creative direction and about how their characters were being portrayed in contemporary films. These legacy actors apparently held significant cultural authority given their iconic status, and their public statements apparently influenced fan discussions and apparently affected broader perceptions of contemporary Star Wars films. Similarly, in the James Bond franchise, previous actors who had played Bond had apparently sometimes commented on creative direction and on how contemporary filmmakers were apparently handling the character. These legacy actors' perspectives apparently influenced how fans and critics thought about contemporary Bond films and apparently affected broader cultural conversations about the franchise. The DC situation apparently followed similar patterns. Legacy actors' cultural authority, combined with their genuine investment in these characters, gave their criticisms significant weight and influence. Whether studios ultimately responded to these criticisms apparently depended on multiple factors, including box office performance, critical reception, and broader industry trends regarding casting and character adaptation. As the dust settled from Supergirl's failure and from the criticisms leveled by legacy DC actors, it became clear that these actors had apparently successfully influenced the conversation about DC Studios' direction and about contemporary superhero filmmaking more broadly. Their criticisms had apparently resonated with significant portions of the audience and had apparently validated concerns about creative direction that many fans had apparently been expressing. Whether Warner Brothers and James Gunn would ultimately respond to these criticisms by changing their approach apparently remained uncertain. But what was apparently clear was that the legacy actors had apparently provided an important counter-narrative to contemporary approaches to character adaptation, and had apparently raised legitimate questions about whether studios were apparently losing sight of what made these characters meaningful to audiences across generations.